Recently, friend of the channel or Analysis reached out to ask if I wanted to make a mini game review as part of a collab he's working on. Of course, calling out from my little cave, I said yes, since I love his channel and you should definitely check him out. But I ended up enjoying my chosen game so much that I just had to make my own video essay on it. If you've come across my channel before, you're sure to have realised that when I like something, I take slightly more than 5 minutes to yap about it. Descending into the world of Homicipher left me hungrily clawing at the heart of its story and themes, simply itching to sift through the guts and gore of it all. So without further ado, welcome to my expanded review and analysis of Homicipher. Grab a warm cup of viscera and get cuddled up with a monstrous creature of your choosing, as we try to decipher a ghostly world teeming with strange encounters, miserable ends, and an oddly comforting sense of belonging. In this deep dive, we'll be looking at themes of monstrousness and femininity, exploring theories and mysteries behind some of Homicipher's iconic characters, and looking at the game through the lens of Japanese folklore and urban legend. Unlike the disembodied heads and contorted creatures it hosts, Homicipher is difficult to put into a box. But I would say it's best described as a point-and-click language puzzle meets horror-drenched otome. In other words, a story romance game with a female protagonist. We play as Adami Adashino, a self-described cute girl, an apparent amnesiac who finds herself mysteriously lost in the ever-changing labyrinthine maze of dilapidated rooms and hallways, known as the Otherworld. Mere moments after arriving in this dingy, disorientating place, we stumble upon the first of many of this world's inhabitants, a multitude of monster men and women lurking in the dark of rubble and shadow, and whose appearances and behaviours seem to scare Adami, immediately setting her apart from them. Though Adami initially opts to run away, unsure of what these creatures might do to her, eventually she finds herself attempting to converse with some of the more seemingly docile residents, even giving them appearance-based names like Mr. Hood for this cloaked man, or Mr. Silver, named after his silver hair. However, despite their best efforts to communicate, it becomes immediately apparent that we cannot understand one another, with each word uttered by the residents appearing on the screen in an unrecognisable language, with space to enter our determinations of their meaning. One of my absolute favourite mechanics in this game is the slow and rewarding process of using context clues, trial and error, and even building rapport with friendly monsters in order to cultivate an understanding of the vocabulary of this world. The clue was in the name. This is indeed a cipher puzzle game absolutely bursting at the gore-splattered seams with homicide. This is the sort of game I find absolutely irresistible, with little details like this simple but effective portmanteau tickling my brain into submission. I'm just an absolute sucker for a good pun, hybrid word, or any little sprinkle of linguistic creativity or playfulness. Just bury me alive in wordplay and I'll die with an amused smile plastered across my face. The more you dare to interact or explore, the deeper your knowledge of their lexicon becomes, with this handy dictionary slowly filling with the otherworldly language, alongside your own approximations of their human translations. Try saying that 5 times fast. Successfully deciphering these words can lead to the expanding of relationships and even the ability to understand warnings and clues about how to progress in certain areas. However, the process is slow and uncertain, 2 elements that feel particularly uncomfortable when misunderstanding a word can mean the difference between life and death. Ultimately, the goal of Homicipher is shaped by the player. Escape this hellish place alive, find yourself warming up to its strangely charming inhabitants, pick fights with blade-wielding maniacs, or live your dreams as the Otherworld's caged-up pet. Your choices can lead to a number of surprisingly diverse endings, some intuitive, some taking a great deal of replaying and dedication. I spent hours exploring multiple routes and endings, and I still didn't uncover everything in my own recordings. So I want to take a moment to give a huge thank you to Scion Gamer for being kind enough to allow me to use their footage in some portions to cover the gaps for things I didn't catch. honestly so lovely of you, and I've linked their video below, which has every possible crevice of this game in one edited long play. What stood out to me the most during the game's 5-chapter journey is just how enjoyable it was to explore and experience multiple options. Though the setting is simple and somewhat generic, the unfolding story of Adami and the various apparitions she comes across make it feel really engaging and innovative. Homicipher's strength lies in its ability to take simple, well-known concepts and tropes and use them to subvert player expectations in ways that feel rewarding, charming, and honestly just fun. A defenseless human girl lost and afraid in a world of monsters which she does not understand. A scenario that has nestled itself comfortably within the blurred lines between horror and romance. There has always been an allure in fiction around inviting monstrous men into our hearts, of women enduring violence with the goal to simply learn to understand their brutish darling. Though something that sets Homicipher apart is that it does not simply glamorize or minimize the danger by putting the protagonist in the box of a helpless girl to be won, ever protected or ended by her blood-starved beau. Nor does it make its monstrous men one-dimensional creatures who exclusively desire only domination, power, or flesh. Rather, it repeatedly nods to those tropes in almost campy, fan service ways, while still giving the protagonist a decent helping of agency, a dark backstory with not a shred of trauma or excessive moral purity to be found, and finally it places both the main character and the monsters in a world that seems to be perplexing and disorientating for everyone. I cannot stress enough how refreshing it is to see these characters having entirely individual reactions and experiences existing in such a volatile and chaotic space. Yes, there are men in this dark romance that have unique quirks and idiosyncrasies beyond rabidly salivating over the main character, and I'm all for it. In fact, the romance element itself is mostly pretty subtle and more of a delicate undertone that runs through the veins of the game without being fully consummated outside one of the endings, the most forthcoming character being Mr. Crawling, who we will explore later. Homicipher truly surprised me in its ability to convey unique personalities, charisma, and warmth in some of its monsters in very simple ways, especially where verbal communication was so limited. Even towards later chapters, when the dictionary is almost entirely fleshed out, the rudimentary caveman-esque formation of sentences when translated is very basic, leaving much of the character development to be established through behaviours. When Mr. Silver sits down to teach Adami directional words and facial expressions as Mr. Chopped pulls out his most Oscar-worthy examples of various emotions, it shows us that these two misters have kind and selfless qualities to them. In this world, understanding is an imperative tool in deciphering the intentions of other monsters, and these two impart this to us freely, with seemingly no agenda other than being affected by the sight of someone lost and afraid in a place they do not seem to belong. It's a world where perhaps even some of these lost boys do not find solace. I also noted how some of the characters seem to care for one another and show appreciation towards Adami for helping or reuniting them, something you don't see represented much in choice romance games, particularly between men. The relationship between Mr. Silver and Mr. Chopped is especially close and really rather sweet. Mr. Hood is another example of someone who is selflessly kind and helpful. He is the first to attempt to teach us some of the most basic words in the game, like you and me, light and dark, and later he can even escort Adami through perilous situations in order to return her to Mr. Silver for medical assistance. When he returns Adami, he immediately leaves, noting that there is nothing more he can do for her, and while this illustrates just how solidly the bar is in hell, I found it really pleasant to see a male character selflessly help a female character without expecting something in return or falling desperately in love with her during her moment of helplessness. Of course, fantasy is always a safe place to explore all manner of romantic or sensual interaction that we wouldn't necessarily want in reality, but I just personally really enjoyed seeing it play out differently here, and it actually made me appreciate Mr. Hood even more. However, not all monsters are built the same, and this is another vital fact that must be grasped as quickly as possible. Where residents like Mr. Chopped radiate a childlike innocence, sweetness, and helplessness, even needing rescuing himself several times throughout the chapters, residents like Mr. Scarletella or Mr. Hugeface seem motivated entirely by their own monstrous desires, driven only towards control, domination, or a need to satiate their bloodlust. Then there exists everything in between, such as Mr. Gap or Mr. Machete, who exhibit kindness but with strict and often extreme conditions. I'm talking Mr. Machete only showing morsels of interest or care towards your life if you prove yourself to not be what he considers boring or weak. I don't know about you guys, but I've definitely met some Mr. and Miss Machetes before. Not fun. Then there's Mr. Gap providing information and support in exchange for body parts, some more essential than others. Even there though, Mr. Gap is more interesting than a mindlessly limb-hungry terror in that his bloody transactions must always be consensual. We love a king with healthy boundaries. If you say no, he does not simply take what he wants or try to trick you into compliance, and violating consent is not shown to be some kind of act of authority or justified by the inevitability of lustful desire. In fact, in one ending, Adami escapes to the surface, and to avoid sacrificing her own heart, she can forcefully tear one from the chest of a stranger on the street, to give to Mr. Gap in exchange for being returned to the Otherworld again. Now, Mr. Gap is visibly and vocally opposed to this action, showing disappointment and disgust at her for having taken something without permission, establishing consent as being a non-negotiable part of his personality. As the chapters progress, Mr. Gap does also learn to derive pleasure from the act of being kind alone, the relief and gratitude of Adami seeming to suffice as payment enough at times, showing that he does not only act on his own selfish interests or desires, though he does continue to take his chances. Sure, buddy, have my entire head, that's totally reasonable. What do I need it for anyway? This dynamic with Mr. Gap is also the perfect illustration of how Homicipher refuses to shy away from the horrors of what might happen if you misunderstand a monster. Let him into your heart if you must, but expect that it may just be ravished. Literally. And don't expect someone else to always be there to save you either. So now we have some understanding of the game's setting and mechanics, why don't we burrow a little deeper? Since it all starts with our leading lady, just who exactly is this Adami? If you haven't played this game, I wouldn't be surprised if my casual mention of Adami forcefully tearing out someone's heart raised an eyebrow or two for you there, and for good reason. On the surface, all clues point to this being a normal young woman, a human who has found herself in a world of horrors, a blank slate for the player to project themselves onto. As mentioned, she describes herself as a cute girl, and in the blissful love life ending, she's shown to have her own apartment in the human world, which we have no reason to assume wasn't her home before the events of Homicipher. In the I'm Back ending, Adami recalls that she had a bag on her that is now missing. She knows what the police are and understands they likely wouldn't believe her if she told them about the Otherworld. And in the Fight ending, Mr. Machete can be seen holding what looks like Adami's phone with a perplexed look. A human device. All of these little context clues build an understanding and trust that Adami is and always has been a human being that is from the human world. So why and how does it seem so natural to her to kill someone like this in such a brutal way and for an utterly selfish purpose, not unlike some of the residents she has been so afraid of herself whilst in the Otherworld? Since the game has multiple routes and endings, there are ways of playing through the chapters without really understanding anything of this side to Adami, and the routes and endings which explore her more gruesome qualities do not give a definitive answer about her nature either. The truth of her origin, as well as the Otherworld and its residents, is left ambiguous in some key places, which I rather like as it leaves room for the fun of interpretation and endless possibilities. And that's what we love to explore here, isn't it, darlings? My initial feeling was that the longer Adami spent in the Otherworld, speaking to its residents and assimilating to their domain, the more she was slowly becoming like them. And perhaps humans getting lost in this limbo for too long is what creates the apparitions of this world. As you progress, there are multiple allusions to this. For example, her skin slowly changes over the course of the game, which disturbs her greatly and leads her to request assistance from the more medically inclined residents like Mr. Silver and Miss Nurse, to varying degrees of success. The handful of times she stumbles across fellow humans, either in the escape endings or when you find this human who is also lost in the Otherworld, they have rather extreme reactions to her appearance, gasping, screaming, grimacing, or running away. She begins being able to heal rapidly, even resisting what would be a certain death for a human at the hands of Mr. Machete's machete, apt names as ever. At one point she can grow enormously huge, or conversely shrink down to a tiny version of herself, though this particular quirk came with another clue that led my mind away from the theory that simply being in the Otherworld was what started to change her. The ability to change size is prompted by a memory. Adami questions herself, remembering that she was once either bigger, smaller, or that she was always a normal size. This option is a good example of how a lot of this story is really up to interpretation or choices as well, but the fact it even opens up there is some sort of history to Adami that involves some supernatural capability definitely got my ears pricking up. Not to mention the fact that she questions the choice of the player if you do not choose big, definitely giving us a strong signal that there may be some kind of hidden compulsion towards growing large and monstrous. Further to this, there seems to be an undeniable connection between Adami and two residents in particular, the Phantom in a Raincoat and Mr. Scarletella. That is where her mysterious origin really starts to flourish, spilling out in a tangle of raw guts and gore, a story that can be knotted up tightly or viciously torn apart and pieced together in a multitude of ways. What fun! Before we get into the viscera of it all, when I personally think of Adami, my mind is drawn towards the horror trope seen time and time again in Japanese horror mythology and media, where strong emotions or inhuman actions themselves can birth curses, monsters, vengeful spirits, or even possess objects and entire locations. Some notable examples being Ju-on, as seen in the horror franchise of the same name, where the Ju-on, literally grudge curse, possesses a house in which a particularly brutal familicide took place. In the film, whoever simply enters the house where the killing happened finds themselves afflicted by the vengeful curse, manifested from the powerful emotions of anger, betrayal, and grief that were released during the act. Or, for any anime fans out there, the entire plot of Jujutsu Kaisen, where cursed energy secretes into the world from negative human emotions, slowly accumulating until it manifests cursed spirits, supernatural creatures with the capability to cause harm. Objects and locations can be so imbued with cursed energy that they become breeding grounds for these entities, and sometimes a singular event can be so extreme or traumatic that massively powerful and deadly curses can be instantly formed as a result. I think my mind gravitates towards this trope because Homicipher clearly references various Japanese urban legends, myths, and folklore. You only need to look at its trope-heavy monsters with their unique rules and behaviours, a persistent theme amongst Japanese yokai, an umbrella term encompassing many kinds of supernatural beings. Or look at the meta-references to the Otherworld residents being written about in human magazines, something Mr. Gap gleefully boasts about when he finds himself captured in print on a loose page. I wondered to myself if this trope of extreme human emotion or action manifesting into something supernatural could be responsible for Adami's questionable species status. Let me explain. Depending on our choices, we can uncover pretty different accounts of how Adami ended up in the Otherworld. Sometimes she can barely remember anything beyond just ending up there suddenly while walking home on a rainy day, as seen here in Ahead's life. And in other instances, she gets full-blown flashback memories. The true story is either purposely left ambiguous or perhaps found somewhere between the different accounts. She is suffering from some sort of memory loss after all, and may not be able to grasp all the details at once. Alternatively, since the choices in the game are what shape the story, it's just as likely that the truth of a particular playthrough can differ depending on the player. Whatever the case may be, Adami's origins are really interesting to explore. In one flashback, it's revealed she found herself transported to the Otherworld during a test of courage, another extremely common trope in Japanese horror folklore and media. Tests of courage are known as kimidameshi in Japan, which literally translates to liver test. This is because in Japan the liver is associated with courage and bravery in the same way as English speakers might say someone has guts. According to scholar of Japanese folklore and ghosts, Zach Davison, there are no set rules to kimidameshi, and there are as many variations as there are people who play it. Kimidameshi can be played impromptu, with only a few friends egging each other on to go somewhere scary or haunted. Or it can be an organised event with a preset course, often inside a prepared haunted house with actors playing the roles of spooks. In its most pure version, a group chooses a destination, one guaranteed to inspire fear. Common examples are dark forests, graveyards, Shinto shrines, abandoned buildings, or known haunted and mysterious spaces called Shinrei spots. Challengers can go alone or as a duo. They go to the chosen spot at night to ensure maximum fear, and they either bring something back to prove they had gone the distance, or leave some sort of token that can be recovered the next day. Spurred on by rumours of a ruin that appears only on rainy days, Adami recalls embarking on this test of courage at these ghost apartments before coming across Mr. Scarlatella, the man with the red umbrella. She recognises him as an infamous paranormal story popularised online, noting his quirks of only appearing on rainy days and trapping his victims in inescapable illusions. He asks victims for their name, which enables him to steal their soul. She wonders if the ghost apartments are his creation, since they appear only on rainy days as he does, before adding what will later become a rather sinister remark, that she made it back, but no one else could be found at all. She even casually goes on to say that she's the only one who managed to go there and make it back more than once, before adding she must leave since those who were lost still cannot be found, not even their bodies. This flashback struck me as incredibly weird when I first saw it. In my playthrough, this was the first bit of backstory I got about Adami from her life before the game's events, and several details just felt odd. For example, she doesn't seem to be too shocked or disturbed by the memory that what would presumably be her friends, or at least peers, were still missing, and even more disconcertingly, she asserts with confidence that not even their bodies would be possible to find, yet does not elaborate on why that might be or what leads her to that belief. If she herself has managed to survive the ghost apartments on multiple occasions, why is she so certain that no one else but her would make it out alive? A more typical response to this memory could be to perhaps hope they might still be alive and maybe even consider searching for other survivors. So how can Adami be so coldly certain that they will never be found, unless she already knows they are dead? When Adami wakes from this dreamy memory, Mr. Crawling asks her if she wants to talk. She declines, showing herself to be truly afraid of Mr. Scarlatella, as she fears that even thinking about him too much might bring him to her again. Adami clearly has a history with this Scarlet Psycho, one that she might not fully remember, but she certainly wants to avoid revisiting. Continuing on leads to a multitude of other possible interactions and experiences, but something notable to keep in mind before we address Adami's second flashback is that the game progression not only sees Adami experiencing physical changes, but psychological ones as well. At first I wondered if this was again a side effect of spending a long time in the Otherworld, that Adami was sort of losing it, as from time to time she experienced lapses in her short-term memory as well. And occasionally it seemed as though she wasn't quite herself anymore, as if there was some darker, more monstrous side to her that could either be indulged or ignored. One example of this is where other beings appear to her as these formless scrawls that can be attacked. If Adami ever acts on these impulses to destroy, where she appears to be in a headspace that disallows her from viewing the subjects of her violence as complete beings, she is able to utterly pulverize their entire form into a chunky gut paste. When Adami indulges in this seemingly cold, unfeeling side, her darker and twisted fantasies, these speech bubbles appear and goad her on, strengthening her resolve to spiral deeper into her monstrous desires. This side of her is also clearly represented by the obscured name that appears at times in place of the usual I that represents main character dialogue or thoughts, as well as the moments the world shifts into this hazy, scribbled out or confused state. And most interestingly of all, any time we see what we later learn is the Phantom in a raincoat, an apparition she sees in place of her own reflection more than once, and who she ultimately ends up dressing up as by picking up their signature weapon, a crowbar, and sporting a raincoat which she receives from the clothes-loving bride in order to protect her dress from bloodstains. These impulses seem to be both separate and at times utterly intertwined with Adami. Sometimes they speak to her through the speech bubbles, and other times, particularly when a player chooses to follow more immoral or monstrous choices, they come out of her own mouth, or are thought as her own thoughts, but still singled out as distinct by the scribbled out name. These moments, coalesced with the strange feeling I had about her first flashback, sparked my curiosity as I started to feel there was a lot more to this main character than a generic personality for anyone to project themselves onto. Clearly there was some link between Adami and this Phantom in a raincoat, who despite being shown multiple times, never seems to literally manifest throughout our journey. Compelled by curiosity and the crippling autistic need to know why, I continued to explore options and endings until I came across this moment with Mr. Gap. At one point he appears in the darkness beneath this duvet, and as usual he has a tantalising trade offer to propose. He produces a fun stack of papers in exchange for but a measly finger, and when vital organs are usually on the menu, this serves as a most fair offer, you must agree. On relinquishing one of her precious pointers, and after her discovery that it barely even hurts anymore anyway, Adami discovers that the stack of papers is actually a magazine from the human world called the Supernatural Special, which seems to document ghostly sightings and experiences. Likely a meta-reference to Japan's real paranormal media such as Moo Monthly, an IRL occult and paranormal conspiracy magazine. I just found the inclusion of this and the fact the yokai of this universe can read about themselves and either be amused or annoyed by inaccurate details to be so amusing. On an open page, he excitedly shows Adami a picture of a strange apparition, a dark figure in a raincoat wielding a crowbar, and seems to suggest that this is either similar to Adami or is quite literally her. Adami reads from the page, finally putting a name to the image we've been seeing in visions all along, the Phantom in a raincoat, apparently responsible for a slew of missing people. In response to seeing this, Adami simply exclaims, "It's me! I'm just a human who enjoys hitting. Stop calling me a monster." An outburst serving to be just the memory jog needed, triggering an altered version of her earlier flashback to elucidate the elusive motives of our mysterious main character. It was just a rainy day like any other. All right. Is that everything? I found everyone. Victory to me. Where did I put my change of clothes? Now, this flashback opens up several cans of particularly wriggly worms. The greater details and meanings of this can be altered through player perception and headcanon, But the basic story here is that it seems Adami was a serial killer before she found herself in the Otherworld. Not only this, her weapon of choice before she ever set foot in the world of monsters was the crowbar she has found herself becoming reacquainted with, the very same weapon associated with the phantom in a raincoat yokai. In this flashback, she also asks herself where she placed her change of clothes, suggesting that at this point she either had not yet considered wearing the raincoat to protect from blood, or she changes her outfit regardless once she's finished her little massacre. There is also an option to smash this mirror here after the reveal, which Adami views as pointless violence, suggesting there may be some thought process or goal behind the killings she has done, something just to put a pin in for later. As she enters the elevator, which has been shown to be a sort of paranormal vehicle between the human world and the otherworld, accessed through these ghost apartments, Adami is surprised, remarking, "Huh? I thought this place was supposed to be ruins. How come the elevator's still running? Was there even an elevator here before?" Before the notorious signs of Mr. Scarletella make themselves known, the flickering lights, the ominous feeling, the glitchy sounds. "Found you," he says, as if he already knows who she is. She's already been here before, despite this being the first time she's actually been in the elevator. When Adami comes out of the memory, she wonders why Mr. Scarletella might be after her, postulating that perhaps he's unhappy about her trespassing in what might be his home. So, quick clarity check before I start thoroughly dissecting my thoughts about Adami and her link to the Phantom and Mr. Scarletella. From what I've understood, the ghost apartments are a supernatural place that appears in the human world on rainy days, and therefore acted as the perfect place to take part in a Kimidameshi, a test of courage. Adami has partaken in multiple Kimidameshis at this ghost apartment, the details of which are unclear, but it seems she may have either personally lured groups there to face this trial of bravery, or waited to ambush unsuspecting adventure seekers as they sought to face their fears. Whichever it may be, she used this group activity as an opportunity to kill that seemed almost like a game to her. Based on her understanding that some violence is pointless, there is a possibility that she has some unexplained justification or purpose that she feels she is enacting when carrying out these crimes. The ghost apartments are a manifestation created by Mr. Scarletella, presumably as a means to take people's souls by trapping them and getting them to reveal their names. Think of the ghost apartments as being like a lure on a fishing line that he throws into the human world when it rains, hoping to catch some unsuspecting victims, which occasionally may be pulled down into the otherworld as well. The elevator seems to be a supernatural vessel in itself, not always appearing in the apartment since Adami has clearly been there multiple times without seeing it. Its magical nature is further exemplified by the fact it can run despite being in a ruin with no electricity. And finally, Adami has now clearly established herself as an unreliable narrator. She is an amnesiac, she appears to have dark and extreme sides of herself that she is unaware of, yet seemingly unsurprised by, and when her memories do return to her, they seem to vary drastically or leave out some vital details. Alright, now we're all caught up with the facts. Let's have a moment to craft some theories about Mr. Scarletella, the Raincoat Phantom, the murdery Miss Adami, and what her affliction adds to the game's themes of monstrousness, romance, and femininity. In the ending Ahead's Life, when Adami's dark side can try killing Mr. Silver, much to the dismay of poor Mr. Chopped, he gets the better of her by launching an attack himself, seeming to rend Adami's head from her body. Once decapitated, Adami seems to return to her more human self, as Mr. Silver proclaims that her problem is gone now that her body has been killed and her head is all that remains. This made me wonder if perhaps Mr. Chopped had a similar story to Adami, needing to be separated from something that possessed him in some way, and that this is why he has such a close bond with Mr. Silver, who relieved him of his murderous vices. This is all but explicitly confirmed in one of Mr. Chopped's special endings, where he reveals some of his origin to Adami, explaining that though he detests rolling around on the dirty floor and getting his precious hair messy, The alternative would have been a very grave situation indeed. This also explains why Mr. Chopped gets so frightened by the sight of the bride, a body without a head, something that could be a reminder of the horrors that resided in his own tainted torso. If Adami resists the urge to kill Mr. Silver, he chains her up until her impulses subside again, before letting her know he wants to study and take care of her to understand why or how a human could change as she does. He tries medicating her, curious about where she is, and suggesting her awareness and understanding might intermittently be lost. This is confirmed as Adami suddenly realizes she had even forgotten Mr. Silver and her time in the Otherworld during this period in captivity. As mentioned, this alternate state Adami enters is represented by the moments she has this scribbled out name, seeming to flicker between two states of being. One more monster-like and driven by violent impulses, one more human-like and able to be curious and care about others. It's worth noting that both Adami's more human side and her possessed side seem to be suffering from memory loss and struggling to fully grasp their identity, perhaps even in dispute over who the real Adami is or who holds primary agency over her body. It seems quite clear to me at this point that this second inhabitant is personified through the phantom in a raincoat, though what I find most intriguing about this story is that I'm pretty certain the phantom is not the origin of Adami's violence. The reason I feel this way is because in the flashback revealing her status as a serial killer, Adami is speaking and thinking as herself, not as this scribbled out name, which I'll just refer to as the Phantom from now on. She also has some kind of awareness about the deaths of the Kimodameshi groups, as evidenced by her rather morbid assertion that not even their bodies would be found, even if she didn't openly recall that the deaths were by her hand in the first flashback. As far as I could find, none of this is definitively explained, so I was left to form my own thoughts and opinions, as are you of course, and as always, if you have your own ideas, please share them with me in the comments because I would seriously love to hear them. I have a lot of potential theories about Adami, but the more I piece these fragments together, the amnesia, the violent impulses, the flickering between states of being, the conflicting memories, the more one particular folkloric pattern kept clawing at me. I couldn't help but start to see the phantom in a raincoat as a tsukimono, another staple of Japanese folklore, literally translating to possession thing. According to Zach Davison, tsukimono are almost exclusively yokai or animal spirits invading human bodies. This is rarely a spontaneous event. Often the yokai possesses the human as an act of revenge, for when a human kills one of the yokai's children or destroys its home, or something along those lines. Or it could be a simple act of greed, like a fox who wants to eat a delicious treat it can't normally get its paws on. The reasons are as innumerable as the yokai themselves. It is always involuntary on the part of the possessed. No one invites a tsukimono into their body. The effects of the possession vary widely as well. In most possessions, the victim takes on the attributes of the yokai or animal. For example, umasuki, or horse possession, can cause people to become ill-mannered, huffing at everything and sticking their face into their food to eat like a horse. Kapasuki become overwhelmed with the need to be in water and develop an appetite for cucumbers. You get the idea. When possessed by any kind of yokai, the vessel will start to embody the attributes and behaviours of their unwanted invader. This feels incredibly close to what happens to Adami. Though we see her with the crowbar in the reveal flashback, we don't actually know if that's how her killing sprees began, if she became compelled to start using a crowbar after becoming influenced by the Phantom, or if she was perhaps even imitating them to begin with. Clearly, Adami frequents supernatural forums as she is aware of the ghost apartments and even Mr. Scarletella. Perhaps she already knew of the Phantom. I know that when she sees the Phantom's picture in Mr. Gap's magazine, she reacts as if it's just her and not something she's seen before, but this isn't uncommon for her either. She frequently displays unexpected reactions or leaves out details from things she actually has awareness of or knowledge about because, well, as established, she's an unreliable narrator. The other possibility I thought of, and which I set the stage for earlier, is that the Phantom was born from her crowbar serial-killing escapades before later possessing her, perhaps in response to her entering the Otherworld. I think that's my personal favourite explanation and the one that makes most sense to me. Just imagine the amount of negative emotion that would be secreted in a place like the ghost apartments. Just on a baseline level, the fear and terror of simply being in a haunted, supernatural place, but then adding to that the terror of being hunted not only by monsters like Mr. Scarletella, but a real serial killer like Adami. This would be the prime emotional ambience for birthing a yokai like the Phantom, perhaps formed from the fear of her victims clashing with whatever powerful emotions and hidden motivations inspired Adami to kill. Another odd detail about Adami I've yet to address is the fact she seems to be wearing a school uniform when she first enters the Otherworld, before the bride gives her a change of clothes and later the Phantom's raincoat to protect her from blood, completing her aesthetic transformation. It strikes me as odd because nothing else about Adami suggests she is actually a schoolgirl. For example, as previously mentioned, she has her own apartment where she seems to live alone, and she never mentions her parents or literally anything else that might suggest she is of school age. Her behaviour and independence feel much more like those of a young woman somewhere in her 20s or 30s, so why is she wearing this uniform? Well, we know that these aren't her regular clothes. These are her killing clothes. We know this because one of the last things she said before entering the elevator in the ghost apartments was, "Where did I put my change of clothes?" And she never got the chance to find them before she ended up in the Otherworld. This school uniform was part of whatever brutal ritual she was performing in her frequent Kimidameshi traps, and it's difficult to overlook or dismiss such a specific type of clothing as inconsequential or without meaning. I personally think it served some sort of purpose for her, and sadly the first thing that comes to my mind when I imagine an adult donning such a uniform is the fetishization of the schoolgirl. Quick side note, apologies for any censors in this video. YouTube is just annoying with certain words and my channel is so tiny, so I need to be careful. Growing up in England, where school uniform is mandatory in most secondary schools, I have first-hand lived experience of being on the receiving end of such fetishization. I am not exaggerating when I say that some of the most explicit catcalling I have ever been subjected to was before I understood what the acts the catcaller was threatening me with even were. And in all of those recollections, I was wearing my school uniform and just trying to get to school. It's times like these I wish I could go back, give myself a hug, and a crowbar. The school uniform feels intentional because it holds cultural baggage, especially in a setting where romantic themes mingle with horror. This feels like a costume, not a practical necessity like in the case of the raincoat. To what end she might have used this costume is again entirely unclear, whether this is a weaponization of the fetishized gaze that would seek to harm her, a way to perform some personal ritual of power, or simply something a warped killer finds amusing. My mind just pulses with the memory of that line when she smashes the mirror, the moment she describes as pointless violence, implying that somewhere in her mind there is violence with a point, a message or a justification. It's interesting to note the significance of clothes, accessories and aesthetics in this game, particularly through the lenses of performing femininity and Japanese folklore. Adami leaves her school uniform behind when it gets wet, exchanging it for a fresh change of clothes given to her by the bride, who appears whenever someone says clothes. This feels like a moment of transformation, where Adami has already been experiencing some of the aforementioned physical and psychological changes being in the Otherworld and under the Phantom's influence have initiated. If the uniform is as symbolic as I believe it is, then a pure white wedding dress is screaming narrative function, likely in a monster tongue. The wedding dress typically carries heavy connotations of transformation, but also of virginal purity, traditionally acting as a symbol of a woman's status as untouched and saved for her husband. However, the circumstances here could not be further removed from the traditional, and so it may serve us better to look at the dress through the lens of the monstrous feminine, a term coined by Barbara Creed to describe the ways in which the female body, sexuality, and reproductive function are framed as sources of horror, threat, or objection in media. Accepting the dress feels like entering a chrysalis, as it is a physical representation of Adami's growing willingness to accept the residents of this world, but also their ways of life. Mr. Crawling explains the function of the bride, showing his familiarity with her and alluding to the ecological harmony that exists between many of the residents, despite their miserable and unpredictable surroundings. At this stage in Homicipher, we as players might still view searching for the exit as the primary objective here, but accepting this stress does feel like a major step towards an active becoming, rather than the more passive state of just being lost. Thus far, Adami's metamorphosis has been largely out of her control, and so in contrast, the instruments she uses and the clothing she wears begin to embody her own agency. The dress does not feel like part of a traditional performance of a docile bride-to-be or a passive prize for the taking, because Adami has already demonstrated her capability, her violence and monstrousness exist in their own right. If the school uniform is the costume for her human ritual of monstrous violence, it would seem that her wedding dress serves as its inverse, a monster's costume of femininity, an outfit of initiation. No longer an outsider trying to survive the rules and rituals of the Otherworld, she becomes an active participant in them. If the wedding dress is the chrysalis, the nature of the emerging butterfly is largely up to the player and can be defined through their actions in the game as well as internal individual perception of the story. In my mind, Adami can either emerge a human, a resident, or a monster. And though residents are still monsters, there is a definite distinction between those two latter outcomes. After her initiation gown becomes defiled with blood and grime, Adami can call upon the bride once more, who will provide her with what can be considered her final form, the consummation of monsterhood, the phantom raincoat. The raincoat has the power to sort of remove Adami from being part of the ecological harmony between residents I described earlier, and can take her to another space within the hierarchy of monsters. This is if she not only wears the raincoat, but actually becomes the costume, forfeiting her body as a vessel for the phantom. Becoming the phantom means becoming a monster among monsters. For example, I would say Mr. Scarletella is a monster among monsters. While there is evidence he complies with the rules enough to still be considered a monster and not a god, he does not play nice, and is a source of fear and disruption within the Otherworld himself. The moments Adami loses herself and either shares in the indulgences of the Phantom's thoughts and wants, or simply endures an uncontrollable switch to this altered state of being, she is no longer becoming part of the world of monsters, but rather a threat to it. The wedding dress signifies mutual participation and initiation, and the raincoat signifies a submission to power and a dissolution of the self. When looking at Adami's transformation, I can't help but think of the complexity of female identity in general. Yes, in Homicipher it unfolds through the surreal lens of serial murder, possession, monsters, and bloodshed, but beneath that I found myself cutting my fingers on these shards of genuine representation. These fragments capture the all-consuming experience of trying to construct an authentic feminine identity in a world that sinks its teeth into women before they are afforded a chance to define themselves. There is something oddly haunting about Adami's ability to self-surrender and become the monster among monsters, about her growing frustration at being too weak to avoid the penetration of Mr. Machete's blade, or having to put her trust in those whose intentions are unclear and who may seek to help her, but equally may exploit, stalk, or even kill her. For me, Adami's experience mirrored the paradox many women face when attempting to claim agency over themselves. For example, a woman might embrace her sexuality as a means of self-definition and liberation, only for that reclamation to take place inside systems that reward male desire and punish or demonize women. That's the sort of tension I see in the raincoat, the complex difference between wearing the costume and becoming the costume. Performing a role on your own terms or surrendering yourself to it. Becoming the Phantom doesn't feel like a true empowerment so much as it does self-annihilation wearing a powerful skin, a transformation that offers freedom in a cage shared with potential allies. The question for women in works like this becomes, how much of yourself will you trade in order to survive? Through Adami's metamorphosis, the game conveys how empowerment and self-erasure can blur and overlap. I came away from it feeling that becoming a monster wasn't the most terrifying outcome, but rather it was the realization that you may never know if you've chosen the form you inhabit, or if you were possessed into it by a world not made for you. The raincoat can also be viewed through another lens, a protective item without the cultural baggage that comes with a school uniform or a wedding dress. It acts as a shell to protect whatever identity lies beneath, one that may be removed, changed, or concealed. You could say that beneath the raincoat are the clothes chosen for self-expression rather than function or ritual. Clothing is always some sort of performance, even if that performance can be more or less of an authentic reflection of something deeper within. The raincoat in this scenario can represent Adami's chosen identity, that of a killer, something closer to monster than human, someone who has found that they no longer find any sense of belonging in the world of humans. Equally, it can serve as a neutral protection, a barrier that shields her from the brutality around her and simultaneously puts her on a more equal footing with someone like Mr. Scarletella, a threatening force who also shields himself with a raincoat and umbrella. Some choices and endings illustrate that Adami can take on the Phantom's raincoat, mirroring the antagonist Scarletella without necessarily having to become him in order to defeat him. Many female survivors, particularly in the horror genre, end up having to surrender their femininity in order to stand a chance against a typically masculine force. So I just found it really refreshing to see some routes and outcomes in Homicipher where it does not feel as though Adami is entirely losing herself in order to stand a chance at survival. Though that outcome is definitely an option too. There are a few endings which really open up questions about Adami's true nature even more overtly, but since they rely on specific choices relating to Mr. Scarletella, I think it's important to explore him and some other elements of the Otherworld first. Though there are many antagonistic monsters throughout Homicipher, Mr. Scarletella certainly stands out among them as being the main villain, but in many ways he functions as a counterpart to the phantom side of Adami as well. Most non-friendly monsters are mindlessly hostile, lunging at Adami and indeed at other monsters, with reckless abandon and without any attempt to communicate at all. Others display varying degrees of moral greyness, some leaving more room for forgiveness than others. Two good examples to illustrate what I mean are Mr. Gap and Mr. Stitch, whose actions could be described as willfully antagonistic, but equally compelling arguments could be made for them not necessarily meaning to be harmful. There is a strange air of innocence about them, and that makes their interactions feel very endearing, even when they may well end in grisly death. Perhaps this is because they can be communicated with or even made sense of in their own ways, the darker sides of them feeling less like defining personality traits and more just products of their environment. Of course, a major part of this is the fantasy component. This is not a real-life situation. In the Otherworld, the quirky, giggly man with mottled greying skin and bloody holes where his eyes used to be, persistently crawling after me everywhere I go and refusing my commands to leave is, well, frankly kind of adorable. Now, if someone started crawling after me while I'm walking home from Sainsbury's, the crowbar would be summoned. Adami has agency in this world, a rarity in typical horror romance settings, and the player shapes the form that agency takes. She may become the Phantom, casting understanding aside and indiscriminately slaughtering her way out of the Otherworld, or clawing her way to domination over it. She may choose instead to understand and assimilate to its customs without losing herself, acknowledging her own monstrousness as a protective factor which helps her survive, rather than consume her entirely. She may choose to help and support other monsters, forming close bonds. There is even an ending where she can take Mr. Crawling back with her to the human world and live blissfully together forever, showing that just as a human can use their monstrousness to survive in a monster world, a so-called monster just might prefer a life immersed in the comforts of human connection and ritual. My favourite ending, to be honest, yes. I am a softie and I am entirely unashamed. Creatures aside, the world itself feels like the true antagonist in the end. A hostile, ever-changing labyrinth of neglect, whose quakes disorient not only Adami but the residents as well, creating a subtle sense of closeness between some and a sense of desperate animalistic kill or be killed between others. Homicipher strips us of our ability to make a reliable judgment about its characters at face value, but instead of trapping us in helplessness, it offers us all of these choices. We can choose whom to trust, whom to learn from, and ultimately, whom to destroy. As touched on, some of these creatures are surprisingly charming and lovable, quite a feat considering the language barrier and gloomy surroundings, making trust feel more alluring than you might imagine, even when intentions are murky and word meanings are unknown. In this world, knowledge truly is power, as powerful as mindless monstrousness, or perhaps even more so. Knowledge is best gathered from communication and connection with others. I mean, it's quite literally the power of friendship or even love. Understanding can help Adami to avoid harm and death, to navigate the world, to find the exit, and even to defeat what are arguably the most threatening forces in the game, Mr. Scarletella and her own dark impulses. This is why I described Mr. Scarletella as a counterpart. Adami's journey through her own monstrousness mirrors Scarletella's in unsettling ways throughout the game. Their paths seem destined to cross, and even become literally entangled in one of the endings. Mr. Scarletella and Adami are linked in multiple ways, by their association with Rain, the fact they both have a strong tie to the ghost apartments, and the fact they both choose to traverse in spaces between worlds and can survive it. Mr. Scarletella is a monster entering the world of humans, and Adami is a human entering the world of monsters. Both are engaged in their own personal rituals, Adami in her Kimidameshi schoolgirl killing ritual, and Mr. Scarletella in his ghost apartment luring name-stealing ritual. Those names really roll off the tongue, huh? I think that the most interesting and enlightening correlation between them, however, is their amnesia. As we have explored, Adami suffers both long-term memory loss and spells of short-term memory loss, with a generous sprinkle of selective memory and aggressive yokai possession thrown into the mix, for fun. It is never plainly revealed just why Adami cannot remember how she ended up in the Otherworld or why and how her memory began to be affected, but the same sort of amnesia is seen one other time in the game, when Adami successfully manages to bring Mr. Scarletella to the brink of death. He forgets who he is, his motivations, his desires, even his own name. Before we enter the next section, it's important that you and me have a little chat about death, or more precisely, to explain what death seems to be for the residents of the Otherworld. Characters are killed multiple times throughout Homicipher, including Adami herself, which at first leads to a mistake end or game over. However, as her progression into resident status advances, she seems to develop the same sort of healing abilities monsters are shown to possess. Creatures can simply come back from a state of utter obliteration, and this is a normal part of the biology of the world. As mentioned earlier, Mr. Silver seems to have destroyed Mr. Chopped's body in order to cure him of his madness, repeating this same unorthodox but effective method with Adami when she attempts to attack him as the Phantom takes over. It is possible to kill Mr. Silver later if taking the route of being caged up rather than decapitated. In Mr. Silver's endings, his sort of mad scientist doctor role is expanded on further, as we get to see an area of the Otherworld where he seems to exclusively quarantine monsters who have become overtaken by murderous vices and spells of bloodthirsty madness. This is framed as being an act of care, where he explicitly states that he wishes to help, though he is also clearly motivated by his own zealous curiosity and interest in the anatomy of human madness, something he may not have had many chances to study or treat thus far. Mr. Silver treats this madness physically, as if changing the physical state of the body can alter consciousness, and he is not the only one. Other helpful residents meet Adami's monstrousness with violence as well, such as Mr. Hood, who plunges his axe into her before sweetly asking if she's feeling better and returned to herself again. Miss Nurse also tries physical violence as a treatment, though interestingly it does kill Adami and lead to a mistake end if she has not yet advanced far enough into her monstrous state. This really supports the idea that Adami is both physically and psychologically becoming the Phantom the more she assimilates to the Otherworld and the longer she remains there. When Adami realises Mr. Silver is attempting to cure her through destruction, she has the choice to either accept this as a factual part of the monster world, or to become enraged at what he has done to her and attempt to kill him again, this time being able to successfully turn him into monster mush. After destroying Mr. Silver's body, however, he simply comes back as a malformed blob, and if you choose to apologise to him here, he essentially responds with, "No biggie, I'll be back in no time," and suggests that being destroyed and remade can even lead to improvements in this world. Mr. Silver seems to break bodies repeatedly until they heal into the preferred form, something Adami even expresses her wish for in the moments she clings to her humanity, recognizing that returning to the human world in such a monstrous state would cause trouble. It seems Adami must suffer violence to be saved from her own compulsive desire. This usually wouldn't be my favourite method of rehabilitation, however it's quite refreshing again that Adami can equally opt out of this and instead kill Mr. Hood and Mr. Silver herself, and that it isn't only her that is subject to this rule. This is simply the way of monsters, and we regularly see residents killing each other with the hope that more hostile creatures might come back, improved. Now that we understand how Adami and Scarletella seem to be counterparts, how love, connection, and understanding are alternative tools to control, violence, and domination, and how destroying the physical body is not necessarily the end for a monster, we can take a look at what happens when Adami faces her Scarlet Psycho head on. Mr. Scarletella is one of two residents who immediately activated my Japanese folklore radar into a frenzy, the other being Mr. Crawling, whose persistent, crawling, conjures warm and cuddly images of the classic Onryo Teke, a girl severed by a train who relentlessly drags herself at impossible speed towards her victims. The iconography of the crawling pursuer is such a staple of Japanese horror and legend that it can be found in multiple pieces of media spanning over the years, and is just instantly recognisable to me here. Scarletella's folkloric roots, on the other hand, seem to be more composite, but his behaviour of appearing before a victim and demanding a response to a particular, repeated question feels very reminiscent of the tale of Kuchisaka Onna. Folklorist Matthew Meyer describes her interactions as follows. Kuchisaka Onna sneaks up on her victims in the dark and asks them if they think she is beautiful. If the victim answers yes, she pulls off her mask and reveals a red, blood-dripping, grotesque mouth. Then she asks in a grisly voice if they still think she is beautiful. If her victim answers no, or screams in terror, she slashes him from ear to ear in an imitation of her own mutilation. If he lies and answers yes a second time, she walks away, only to follow her target home and slaughter him brutally that night. In many versions of the legend, the only way to foil her strange and brutal trap is by answering vaguely. Saying she is so-so, average, or even throwing money or sweets towards her as a distraction are a victim's best chance of escape. I smiled to myself when Adami finds this candy in the game, which feels like a possible nod to this legend. Though they are by no means the same, the general feel of Mr. Scarletella's yokai behaviour really reminds me of this tale. He appears suddenly and, rather than asking for a fit assessment, he asks for the victim's name. Though while we're on the topic, you ate, sweetie, I love the colour coordination. Speaking to Mr. Scarletella is a major component of defeating him. In order to disrupt his ritual, Adami must refuse to give her name, instead offering false names or saying nothing at all. She must systematically contradict each proposition he makes, a key moment where knowledge of the Otherworld language comes into play again, where the time a player has put into bonding with other monsters and filling out the dictionary becomes the perfect weapon. Just like Kuchisaka Onna, Scarletella's logic is brittle and unchanging, leaving him powerless when his usual script cannot be completed. Understanding Mr. Scarletella through the lens of Japanese folklore and legend helps us understand how the power of many yokai is heavily dependent on linguistic traps, and that simply knowing what to say can be the difference between surviving or the not-so-trivial matter of losing your soul. The other Japanese legend our dear Scarlet Psycho reminds me of is a tsukumogami. This is a category of yokai that encompasses objects that have gained a spirit. There are multiple interpretations of this legend, but the most widely accepted definition is an object that has survived for 100 years without being destroyed, and therefore gains sentience. This could literally be any object: a lantern, a doll, an umbrella. The object may be vengeful if it was treated poorly, helpful if taken care of, or somewhere in between. The telephone is a good example of this. While you could theorize someone is speaking to you through it, there is never any confirmation of this, and the name is always just telephone rather than question marks or voice. I will expand on my reasonings more soon, but I feel as though it could just be a helpful tsukumogami. Mr. Scarletella would be an unusual take on this particular legend, given that he is a humanoid holding an umbrella rather than being an animated umbrella himself. Or is he? Dun dun dun. During the routes where Adami opts to face Scarletella, we learn both from Mr. Gap and from our internal phantom voice that the reason our crowbar simply phases through him, seemingly unable to cause him any real harm, is that his true body is not located in the Otherworld, but rather somewhere in this human world lore, the ghost apartments, his domain. If Adami wants to truly destroy Mr. Scarletella, she must find the heart of him somewhere in this building. This heart, or true body, is later revealed to be, you guessed it, his umbrella. There are several endings that can be obtained during this sequence in the ghost apartments, and though none of them explicitly confirm anything, they seem to be the most revealing about the nature of humans, monsters, and what distinguishes them. One of the biggest revelations here is that Mr. Scarletella is not actually hunting Adami out of vengeance for trespassing in his domain. Rather than seeking punishment, he seems filled with admiration and gratitude, seeming to believe that Adami's killings were not isolated acts of her own ritualistic prerogative, but rather gifts intended for him. He states that she gave him many humans for expressing how much he likes her, suggesting that he has become fixated on and enamored by this fabricated narrative. To my utter amusement, Adami's thoughts about this are simply, "Oh, talk about a narcissistic stalker. Gross." And honestly, my thoughts exactly. I mean, a girl can't even engage in some casual ritualistic murder at the occult meetup spot in peace without some guy making it all about him these days. Jeez. Jokes aside, Scarletella is clearly very keen on having Adami, on being able to take her for himself by coercing her into giving her name to him. This would suggest he sees such an act as being something like a privilege, that it perhaps wouldn't mean death for her, rather they would be together somehow. If you actually tell Mr. Scarletella everything he wants to hear, that you want to go with him, to be together, that you appreciate him, he does not kill Adami or prompt a game over. Instead, he appears to turn to a clear umbrella, leading Adami to believe she defeated him. However, on picking up the umbrella, it's obvious that this is far from the case, and the two seem to now be completely intertwined with one another, together forever in his special ending. Perhaps the fact the umbrella is no longer red suggests he no longer possesses it, but rather possesses Adami herself. The umbrella being clear, just like the Phantom's raincoat, also made me wonder if it had in turn become possessed by the Phantom, a little Freaky Friday body swap action. Alternatively, it could just be a visual representation of the two entities now being one. Following other choices, Adami can instead use the sheer power of her will to send Mr. Scarletella to hell, seeming to unleash an immense level of unrestrained power upon him, as illustrated by these catastrophic sounding attacks. This goes on until there is nothing left but the savaged remains of his umbrella, barely able to utter fragments of words. Adami puts forth the theory again that this mangled umbrella may be his true remains, where the essence of his spirit originates. If you choose to interact with what remains of him rather than break him entirely, Adami asks him what he does, to which, as mentioned, it seems he has lost all memory of his purpose, his name, everything. Adami converses with her phantom side, deciding to give him a new name, a name he accepts submissively before being commanded to become her servant, to stay by her side, just as he had once commanded of her. Giving you the Scarlet Rain end, a clear blend of these two entities, the Phantom in a raincoat and Mr. Scarlatella, the Scarlet Umbrella. What makes these two conjoining endings so striking is that despite their surface level similarities, they convey opposite power structures. In the Scarlatella end, he gains the upper hand by possessing Adami on his terms, something she is clearly unhappy with as she hoped she defeated him, screams in fear at the sight of him, and attempts to run, though he is clearly now fused with her, simply reaffirming they are together in his final word. In Scarlet Rain, Adami exerts dominion by renaming and enslaving Scarlatella in tandem with the Phantom, illustrating how their motives and decisions are slowly becoming merged. In this ending, Adami's autonomy still remains ambiguous despite her seeming upper hand, marred by the same dilemma explored earlier. Is she acting of her own volition, or surrendered herself to a monstrousness that the world demands? Personally, though I find him to be a compelling character, so it saddens me to destroy him entirely, my favourite resolution to this route comes from the decision to break Scarlatella, ending his reign of terror for good. The two choices here feel so significant: break or talk. In a game where communication is such a powerful asset, the choice between breaking him or talking to him really illustrates what an equal standing they have. A player needs to make the ultimate decision here, whether this final act of violence is the only way to truly free Adami and the other residents from the perilous domination of the Scarlet Umbrella, or whether Adami simply replaces him as the new monster among monsters. Scarlatella's power comes from trapping people with words. There doesn't seem to be a way to reason with him, only to enslave him, an act which requires Adami to forego more of her remaining humanity, if it was ever there to begin with. Let's explore the elements of the breaking route more deeply. In the goodbye end, if you first run from Mr. Scarlatella, you can encounter the telephone I mentioned earlier. Adami can ask the telephone how to find Scarlatella's true body, or she can ask if she is human. Interestingly, the telephone tells Adami that she is not. It seems to be suggesting that the length of time Adami has spent in the Otherworld has had an impact on her status as human, just as she figured herself. This leads Adami to consider if the word she thought meant human actually has a different meaning entirely. Now, I may just be biased to my own theory here, but this interaction gave me the impression that perhaps the word for human may actually be more accurate to something like possessed. Maybe residents have their own words to describe someone in Adami's state, somewhere between human and monster. This would explain why Mr. Silver is so intrigued by and keen to study her, despite the fact it doesn't seem all that rare for humans to accidentally end up in the Otherworld. We even come across one during our adventure, and we know the ghost apartments are a common place for the curious and courageous, meaning many people must stumble across the elevator on those infamous rainy days. It seems something absolutely sets Adami apart from the other human beings, whether the emotions from her serial killings formed the Phantom in the first place, or whether she was somehow possessed by them to begin with, is simply unknown. But again, I have to say, I'm quite drawn to the thought that her killing ritual created the Phantom, especially when I think back to that trope I mentioned right at the start of the video, about how often extremes of emotion and action can birth curses and yokai. As for her memory loss, seeing the state Mr. Scarlatella is in after being brought to the brink of death, made me wonder if something similar had happened to the phantom part of Adami, causing this amnesia. Whether one of her victims fought back, or perhaps Mr. Scarlatella was attempting to take Adami for himself, almost killing the phantom part of her and causing this amnesia, there are just so many possibilities. Another thought is that everyone in the Otherworld was once either human or possessed, and that after enough time there, they become residents with no memory of their former lives. Perhaps all of them are subject to some level of control under Mr. Scarlatella, which would explain why everyone seems so disturbed by him. Perhaps Adami even gave Scarlatella her phantom name, something that wouldn't break his script, but also doesn't exactly follow it either. It isn't clear if monsters have souls in this world, but giving him the phantom name may have caused some kind of disconnect or psychological rupture without entirely losing anything. All of this is just pure conjecture and speculation, of course, but it's a fun space to explore and undoubtedly one of the elements of Homicipher that has made it so beloved and discussed. Back to the telephone scene, after pondering what she has just been told, Adami asks herself, "I was human, right? Even if I'm not anymore." To which the Phantom responds, "Who knows?" I really like this part because as the game proposes the ominous question if Adami the human ever really existed, it shows this image. An image that, with all the knowledge we have gained, could easily be seen as Adami possessed by the Phantom, but could equally be Adami the human serial killer. Interestingly, as you turn away from the telephone and after the catastrophic attack on Scarlatella, a prompt appears on screen. Rather than give your name, you must delete it, a choice that seems to suggest Adami is forsaking something of herself, perhaps her humanity or soul to some degree, but on her own terms rather than giving it to Scarlatella. I believe that both monstrousness and humanity have always existed within Adami, and so deleting something of herself here could be a symbolic removal of some or all of her monstrousness, or equally some or all of her humanity. Ultimately, how much of the conflicting parts of herself are removed or kept is down to player perception, and maybe more clearly defined by her following choices. For example, if from here she goes on to engage in the Scarlet Reign ending, it could be argued that she lost all her humanity and entirely embraced monsterhood, becoming that monster among monsters. However, if she chooses to break Scarlatella, then return to the human world, she simply wakes in her bed again, barely able to hold on to the memory of what she now believes was all simply a dream. Here she appears to forsake her monster side entirely, an ending that feels unsatisfying and a bit of a denial of reality, as we as players got a taste of how embracing the monster within and out does not have to be defined by darkness and evil alone. As with all things, it would seem that the most fulfilling outcomes are those that consider balance. Adami is not a normal human, however, she does not have to be a mindless monster either. Her final act of annihilation can be seen as a means to an end, using her power to disrupt Scarlatella's domination and reclaim agency over her own actions. Rather than defining this act for us, I like that Homicipher uses it as a sort of reset point for Adami. After breaking the umbrella, another decision is presented. Now free from her pursuer, but perhaps irrevocably changed by her experience in the Otherworld, Adami is prompted to choose her own path. This scene is another reason I believe the telephone character to be a Tsukumogami, because we must either choose it to return to the world of monsters, or choose the modern smartphone to return to the world of humans, waking up in Adami's apartment. These two objects are perfect visual representations of the Otherworld and the human world. The telephone, a communication device that quite literally can communicate, something that must be at least 100 years old if following the rules of Tsukumogami, symbolizing a world of old, a world of possession and otherness, but also a world with friends, understanding, and perhaps even belonging within the strangeness. The telephone itself has been a guiding voice throughout the entire game, directing us, warning us, teaching us, but most interestingly of all, reminding us that we must make a choice. We get to choose exactly who to be, big or small, hurtful or kind. It does not try to sway one way or another, only to try to get us to make the decision while we still have a mind to use. The smartphone, in contrast, feels very cold and empty, and in its own way, I've come to associate it with the strangely disconnected and invasive voice of the Phantom, most likely due to their words always appearing in those speech bubbles that feel almost like text messages. That's something I haven't quite figured out myself. I don't think the Phantom is literally texting Adami, though perhaps she is compelled to write the messages to herself in the moments the Phantom takes over. But honestly, I'm just not sure. Either way, that coldness and disconnect is a thread the phone and the Phantom share. And it certainly makes for a stark contrast against the more helpful, neutral, and caring tone, excuse the pun, of the telephone. Where the voice of the Phantom is calculated, goading, and seemingly motivated by its own desires, the voice of the telephone seems more understanding and nurturing, allowing Adami to find her own path and reminding her she has choices. Adami has not shared anything about the human world she seems to yearn for or miss beyond a generic goal to just get back and sort of just be normal. So I imagine it isn't unusual that the monster world with the oddly charming Misters and Misses feels more like a natural choice at this point. The question of Homicipher starts to feel less about what's Adami's history and more about what should her future look like, and where does she feel more at home? And once again, the answer to that is truly up to you. I know where I'm going. Choosing the Tsukumogami telephone leads to Adami waking up in her bed in the Otherworld to the sight of a concerned Mr. Crawling, who comments that he was worried Adami was dead, seeming to mean her true self, in other words, her non-phantom side. If Adami refuses to face the reality of what happened, believing it to just be a dream, she goes back to her default position of just generically wanting to find the exit. This is the tranquil end, and feels to me a bit like someone half facing their demons, sort of making peace with them but not fully acknowledging everything about themselves, and therefore perhaps not able to live as truly as they otherwise might. However, if she stays with the memory of defeating Mr. Scarlatella, she has this adorable little moment to celebrate her victory with the ever-enthusiastic Mr. Crawling. This unlocks the victory end, a little nod to Adami's prior proclamation of victory after a successful killing spree, which again just makes me so curious about what Adami felt she was conquering in her Kimidameshi rituals. Whether her killings were random acts of sadism, or whether Adami felt she was exterminating perceived or even real threats in the human world, we will never know. But of course, you can't exactly go around luring and killing people en masse. It's most unbecoming, darling. But perhaps finding some solace in her status as being somewhere between human and monster, and finding a home amongst kind-hearted fellow weirdos, can heal whatever tormented Adami's mind enough to be drawn to kill. Especially so if her targets were humans with more monstrousness than the Otherworld could even conjure. Who knows? As a player, all I wish for is the choice to help guide her fate towards something that looks more like freedom. Not unchecked power, not mindless violence, but not playing a part or putting on a mask either, and not by being consumed by darkness rather than harnessing it. The question is, can Adami truly embrace monsterhood without losing herself? And can she actually find herself a better kind of freedom than simply escaping back to the human world in which she feels so out of place? So, if Adami stays in the Otherworld, who's to say the Phantom won't just continue to consume her? In general, the only way to free someone from a tsukimono or possessing thing is through an exorcism. Whether these be by priests or shamans, removal of such a creature is said to be a spiritual battle. Several methods can be used when attempting banishment of evil and unwanted spirits, but a couple of things stood out to me during my research of exorcism practices in Japan. One of which is that often stories of exorcism involve trying to soothe or calm the spirit rather than confront it head-on or meet it with some kind of hostility. Science writer Matthew Coslet describes one such story in the wake of World War II regarding fears of spiritual possession by dead soldiers. The spirits were appeased not with dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet ritual. Incense was burned, and a priest promised to offer annual prayers for the soldiers' spirits, which calmed the restless. He goes on to describe more methods of purification. Misogi, cold water cleansing, fasting, and chanted mantras push the intruder out. Some rites add goma, a fire offering, to seal the work. And at the end of summer's Obon, Toranagashi sees families release glowing paper lanterns down rivers to guide ancestral spirits back to the other world. I got rather excited when I realised that all of these prevalent methods of dispelling unwanted internal visitors can be found across the 5 chapters of Homicipher. Adami is entirely immersed in cold water. She refuses the strange food and drink in the room with the rageful painting. She chants with Mr. Crawling, at his instruction no less, which effectively heals her. She torches the fabric room, setting it completely ablaze in an offering of flame. She lights candles and engages respectively with yokai and their customs. Then, of course, we have the in-universe method of changing the body to change the mind, something Adami experiences multiple times. It is also often said in these tales that putting the body through extremes can help someone relinquish things that cause them harm and to advance forward positively. The term misogi, originally cold water cleansing, is even used modernly as a catch-all for a particularly challenging trial, meant to push someone out of their comfort zone to gain mental clarity and resilience. If that isn't what Adami is going through during her entire time in the Otherworld, I don't know what is. All of this is to say, I feel as though the journey of Homicipher itself can be used as an exorcism of whatever is plaguing Adami. Whether the goal is to dispel the phantom entirely, or integrate parts of her monster self more harmoniously in a way that allows her to remain in touch with her true wants and desires, rather than be consumed and remade by external forces out of her control. Perhaps the true final form of her metamorphosis is to acknowledge all parts of herself, and to own her choices, to live without the masks and expectations of human or monster, and just be. Whether that being is cozying up in her human apartment with her favourite monster man, or celebrating victory in the Otherworld with a group of misfits that make her forget just what made her want to pick up that crowbar in the first place. In case you couldn't tell, I have fallen rather helplessly for this little-known horror gem with an understandably loyal and enthusiastic following. It's challenging, rewarding, campy, and even genuinely touching and sad at times. Far from being a slave to stereotypes, Homicipher does a lot of clever subversions with its use of tropes, allowing for such a fresh experience which I massively appreciate, especially in this niche genre of horror romance. Of course, you can use any prior understanding about Japanese folklore to the best of your ability here, but often things will still not play out as you might expect. As established, Adami is probably the best example of this. She is primed to be the fish out of water, born yesterday amnesiac stereotype, plopped into a scary world of killer men she cannot understand. Yet, she turns out to be one of the most surprising examples of, I'm not trapped in here with you, you're trapped in here with me. Homicipher stuffs its stitched-together skin to bursting with these familiar narratives, the damsel in distress, the vengeful spirit, the monstrous suitor, then affords itself the entire playtime to contort them into something far more interesting, playful, and just downright fun to experience. I'm always pleasantly surprised when a female-centered romance doesn't have me rolling my eyes or feeling a little unsure about what exactly is supposed to be so desirable about a situation or person. So the genuine happiness and satisfaction I got from this experience just went so far above and beyond, to the point that the subtleness of a lot of the romantic elements did not feel like a loss at all, but rather a positive. The walls of Homicipher's labyrinthine depths might be screaming of ancient terrors, but my heart sits willingly on the dungeon slab, pulsing with the gallons of charm transfused into it throughout every chapter. I am not starved for substance with a slew of suitors gnawing at the morsels that remain clinging to my helpless husk, with no real agency to stand on my own feet or truly find a place in a strange and intriguing new world. And that is just such a relief. The ambiguity of key parts of Adami's past is also a fantastic way for the player to be able to project a little bit of themselves into her without making her feel empty and powerless to whatever we subject her to. Her metamorphosis, shaped by the choices we make and how we individually perceive them, can vary wildly. Forsake all shreds of humanity and become that monster among monsters, or wake up in the human world as if it was all just a dream to be blinked away before facing another normal day. The extremes that the opposite ends of the spectrum reach into allow for a colourful and varied in-between, where player imagination and choice can craft so many outcomes, which I just appreciate and love so much. And I'm not the only one. You only need to take a peek into the places where this fandom convenes, and you will find endless excited and passionate people constructing their own ideas about this world and its inhabitants. Even the language and translations have never been explicitly confirmed by the creator, deepening player immersion and involvement in the narrative about as far as it can go. The spirit of inversion, subversion, and player perception extends to the residents of the Otherworld as well, many of whom I've not covered here in detail, both to keep the scope more focused, but also to hopefully encourage you as a viewer to play the game yourselves if it piques your interest. My dearest crawling companion, whose Onryo-esque appearance initially drew my mind to memories of terror and dread from watching Ju-on and Ringu as a child, ended up being one of the most gentle and selfless presences in the game for me. The strange sweetness of his reassuring head pats and the immediacy of his loyal chaperoning replace all worldly fears about what it would actually mean to be followed down a dark corridor by an eyeless man with a penchant for giggling and an abnormal enthusiasm towards being the finder in an impromptu round of hide and seek. Despite his following and clinginess, he isn't actually imposing. If you choose to leave the Otherworld without him, he waves you off unless you explicitly invite him. It really recontextualizes his persistent pursuit as being purely a means of looking out for you and genuinely not understanding the moments Adami expresses a wish for him to leave. He becomes such an emotional safe harbour throughout the game that it's no wonder he's the only Mister to get his own happy ending outside the Otherworld. Mr. Crawling is not the exception either. Time and time again, Homicipher presents us with a monster archetype who cannot clearly express their intentions, inviting us to make an assessment based on our familiarity with those archetypes, before re-articulating it in a way that allows for tenderness, humour, or camaraderie. It refuses to buckle under the player's instinct to crush them down into one-dimensional love interests or enemies. The monstrousness of men being romanticized is a frankly overused trope in female-centered horror romance, or even just romance in general. And don't get me wrong, Homicipher absolutely indulges in it as well, but it also allows its monsters to be alluring, frightening, ridiculous, sweet, deeply flawed, and in some cases unexpectedly normal considering the setting. They have relationships with each other and motivations of their own that do not solely revolve around dominance and power. This little guy just wants a damn haircut, and you can bet your smashed cursed doll I'm dedicating my time to find those scissors and locating the nearest salon for this precious, decapitated noggin to feel like the sweet ginger prince that he is. I'll be taking no further questions at this time. Even the more stereotypical monstrous suitor men come in different flavours. The suffocating possessiveness of Mr. Hugeface, Mr. Scarlatella's parasocial delusion, Mr. Machete's coercive bravado and dismissiveness, and even Mr. Gap's withholding of help at certain times is undoubtedly a highly manipulative act. These are all portraits of very human failings, stretched into a canvas made of monster skin. And yet, it also gives us monsters who care, soothe, give space, and express emotion openly even if their words cannot yet be understood. It also allows Adami to decide how to harness her own monstrousness, rather than forcing a linear experience of keeping her in a realm of helplessness in order to bolster or facilitate typical horror romance dynamics and stereotypes. Despite some residents clearly having less development than others, which is very understandable for a game by a solo developer, every one of them shone through in their own way and felt both unique and totally natural. The character designs and behaviours are all so interesting and engaging, and you can probably tell by how often I reference Japanese urban legends and folklore in this video that I deeply enjoyed the clear roots of inspiration that the developer Yatsunagi seemed to have drawn from these tales. For Adami, navigating a world of monsters becomes a game of understanding, not only the language and behaviours of those who inhabit it, but her own desires and fears, what she rejects, what she is willing to become, and at what cost. If Homicipher can be read as a sort of exorcism, then perhaps its most critical message is not that every ghost needs banishing, and that those you choose to keep need not necessarily turn you into something grotesque or unlovable. Some ghosts need to be deciphered before they are so violently pushed away. Some need patience, soothing, or boundaries. Some need you to run. Some need you to take things slowly. And a few may even just be worth inviting through the window in the dark of night. Perhaps transformation is not about purging oneself of all of our strange darkness, or destroying whatever stands between us and the self-sacrificial pursuit of so-called normalcy, but rather enveloping ourselves in the protective cloak of the shadows that make us feel most comfortable in our ever-changing skin. Thank you so much for watching this video, and if you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing. If you had any thoughts that you'd like to share, if you've played the game yourself, if you have your own ideas about Adami or the other residents of the Otherworld, feel free to leave it in a comment. I'd love to read it. And you know, if you liked it, that like button's looking kind of lonely, so you know. Or if you're going to play the game yourself after watching this, I want to hear what you think about it. I also have a Patreon, patreon.com/nightmoire, it's linked below. If you are so inclined and you would like to support me over there, that would mean the world. And I post different videos like behind the scenes and making of videos over there. I do blooper reels when I make videos like this because I just lose the ability to speak every 5 seconds while I'm recording. So I thought, why not let all of you laugh at me and upload it over there? If that sounds like something that you would be interested in, I'm also planning on adding other things over there over time. Feel free to join as a free member, or there's a few tiers to choose from. Otherwise, I'm just happy to have had you here and that you spent some time with me. And hopefully I'll see you again on the other side. Goodbye, darling.